Adolf Hitler didn't build the Third Reich alone. History often paints him as a solitary madman dictating from an underground bunker. But the terrifying truth is much worse. Behind Hitler stood a highly sophisticated, deeply fanatical brain trust, a collection of brilliant minds, ruthless bureaucrats, and psychotic strategists who took a broken democracy and engineered it into a global war machine. This wasn't a team of loyal brothers. This was a nest of vipers. To understand how Nazi Germany managed to conquer Europe, engineer the Holocaust, and sustain a multi-front war against the world's greatest superpowers, we must look at the men who held the strings. Hermann Göring, the flamboyant warlord. Heinrich Himmler, the cold-blooded architect of terror. Joseph Goebbels, the psychological manipulator. And Albert Speer, the technocrat who fueled the war. Hitler intentionally structured his inner circle to fight amongst themselves. He believed in a twisted version of social Darwinism that, by forcing his top ministers to constantly compete for his favor, only the most ruthless would survive and execute his will. There were no clear lines of authority. Ministries overlapped, commands contradicted each other, and betrayal was the currency of the Reich Chancellery. Every morning, these men woke up wondering not just how to defeat the Allies, but how to politically stab each other in the back. But when their agendas aligned, the results were devastatingly efficient. In this tactical breakdown, we pull back the curtain on the psychotic inner cabinet of the Third Reich, the strategists who built the empire, and whose massive egos eventually tore it down. Before a single tank could roll into Poland, Hitler needed to capture the minds of 80 million citizens. For that, he relied on a man with a severe physical limp, an immense inferiority complex, and an absolute genius for psychological warfare, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. Goebbels understood a fundamental rule of human psychology long before modern media existed. He famously stated that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. He didn't just censor the press. He took absolute control of it. He subsidized the production of cheap radios, the Volksempfänger, ensuring that Hitler's voice penetrated every single living room, kitchen, and factory across Germany. Goebbels pioneered the art of the political spectacle, the massive Nuremberg rallies, designed with towering pillars of light reaching into the night sky, were his creations. He turned politics into a secular religion, casting Hitler as a flawless savior and framing Germany's minorities as existential biological threats. But Goebbels' true strategic test came in 1943, after the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad. When morale was plummeting, he delivered his infamous total war speech at the Berlin Sportpalast. He asked the crowd, "Do you want total war? Do you want it more total and radical than anything we can even imagine today?" The crowd screamed in approval. Goebbels had successfully re-energized a dying population, turning a military disaster into a fanatical crusade that extended the war by 2 bloody years. While Goebbels managed the mind, the skies belonged to a former World War I fighter ace who became the second most powerful man in Germany, Hermann Göring. Dressed in custom-designed, flamboyant uniforms covered in medals, and living a life of extreme luxury fueled by stolen art, Göring was the public face of Nazi military might. Hitler gave Göring unprecedented power. He was the chief of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, the head of the 4-year economic plan, and Hitler's officially designated successor. In the early days of World War II, Göring looked like a strategic mastermind. His Luftwaffe was the devastating tip of the Blitzkrieg spear, obliterating air forces in Poland, France, and the Low Countries. But Göring's massive ego would prove to be his strategic undoing. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, his arrogance blinded him. He promised Hitler he could crush the Royal Air Force in days. When British bombers launched a small, retaliatory raid on Berlin, a humiliated Göring, who had boasted that if a single bomb fell on Berlin, "You can call me Meyer," shifted target from British airfields to civilian cities. This single tactical error gave the RAF time to recover, handing Germany its first major strategic defeat. As the war dragged on, Göring retreated into a fog of morphine addiction and luxury at his massive estate, Hall. He continuously lied to Hitler about aircraft production numbers, assuring the Führer that the Luftwaffe could supply the trapped Sixth Army at Stalingrad from the air. It was a physical impossibility. Göring's vanity left the German army starving in the snow, proving that his loyalty was never to tactical reality, but to his own survival in Hitler's good graces. If Hermann Göring was the loud, ostentatious face of the regime, Heinrich Himmler was its silent, terrifying ghost. A failed chicken farmer with an obsession for occultism and racial purity, Himmler looked more like a low-level schoolteacher than a mass murderer. Yet, he built a state within a state that executed the most horrific crimes in human history. The SS. Himmler was a master bureaucrat. He systematically took control of every police force in Germany, combining them with the SS and the Gestapo, while Hitler spoke in broad, ideological concepts about eliminating his enemies. Himmler was the technocrat who figured out the logistics. He transformed hatred into an industrial process. Under his direct command, the SS constructed and operated the vast network of concentration and extermination camps across occupied Europe. Himmler viewed this mass slaughter not as a crime, but as a historic, difficult duty. In a secret 1943 speech to SS officers in Posen, he called the extermination of the Jewish people a glorious page in our history that has never been written and shall never be written. Himmler's strategy was total control through absolute terror. His SS empire controlled factories, plundered resources, and held the entire population of occupied Europe under a continuous death warrant. By 1944, Himmler's power was so vast that his shadow loomed larger than Hitler's own generals, making him the true, terrifying engine driving the Third Reich's ideological war. By 1942, Nazi Germany was facing economic collapse. The Blitzkrieg had failed in Russia, and the country was now locked in an industrial war against the combined manufacturing power of the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States. To survive, Hitler turned to his young, brilliant personal architect, Albert Speer. Speer was appointed Minister of Armaments and War Production. Unlike the fanatical old guard of the Nazi Party, Speer was an educated, highly rational technocrat. He looked at the war purely as a data and logistics problem. He streamlined factories, eliminated bureaucratic red tape, and gave industrial managers direct authority over production lines. The results were terrifyingly effective. Under Speer's management, despite relentless Allied strategic bombing campaigns that leveled German cities day and night, German weapons production didn't go down, it tripled. He produced more tanks, planes, and ammunition in 1944 than at any other point in the war. But Speer's economic miracle was built on a foundation of unadulterated human cruelty. To fuel his factories, he partnered directly with Heinrich Himmler to use millions of slave laborers from the concentration camps. Prisoners were worked to death in subterranean weapons factories, starved, and executed when their productivity dropped. Speer presented himself as an apolitical artist just doing his job, but he was the vital life support system that kept Hitler's genocide operating long after the war was strategically lost. April 1945, the final act, as Soviet artillery shells pounded the Reich chancellery into dust. The internal structure of Hitler's brain trust fractured into complete chaos. Safe inside the subterranean concrete walls of the Führer bunker, the grand illusion was finally breaking down. One by one, the Vipers turned on their master and each other. Hermann Göring, safe in southern Germany, sent a telegram to the bunker asking if he should take over leadership of the Reich. Hitler, fueled by a final burst of paranoia and encouraged by Goebbels, flew into a rage, stripping Göring of all his titles and ordering his arrest for high treason. Days later, news reached the bunker that Heinrich Himmler, the man Hitler called der true Heinrich, loyal Heinrich, had secretly attempted to negotiate a surrender with the Western allies behind the Führer's back. It was the ultimate psychological betrayal. Hitler ordered Himmler's execution, but the SS chief had already disappeared into the shadows, disguised as a common soldier. Only Joseph Goebbels remained completely loyal to the very end. On April 30th, after Hitler committed suicide, Goebbels briefly became chancellor of a ruined nation. One day later, refusing to live in a world without National Socialism. Goebbels and his wife poisoned their 6 children before committing suicide in the Chancellery Garden. Albert Speer chose a different path of survival, disobeying Hitler's final Nero decree, which ordered the total destruction of Germany's remaining infrastructure before surrendering to the Allies. The reckoning came at Nuremberg. Göring was sentenced to hang, but cheated the gallows by swallowing a hidden cyanide capsule hours before his execution. Himmler committed suicide shortly after being captured by British troops. Albert Speer served 20 years in prison, projecting a calculated myth of the good Nazi who knew nothing of the regime's worst crimes, a lie history would later thoroughly debunk. Hitler's brain trust proved that absolute evil does not require a single monster. It requires a network of ordinary men, intellectuals, bureaucrats, and administrators who willingly suspend their morality to serve a fanatical vision. Their legacy is not one of strategic genius, but an eternal warning of how easily civilized minds can organize the destruction of the world. Thanks for watching History Insignia TV. If you found this tactical breakdown insightful, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below on which strategist was the most dangerous. See you in the next episode.